The elevator shuddered once, a lazy off-center tug that made the ancient cables groan, and resumed its slow, clanking descent. I shifted my weight to absorb the lurch, my hand hovering over the chipped console. Someone had carved a spiral into the brushed steel panel long ago, its edges worn smooth by time or thoughtless repetition. A crude spiral, pointless if you weren't the type to see meaning in such things. But down here, meaning had weight. Down here, everything did. Beneath us, Sector 20 breathed in mechanical rhythms. Cooling fans spun with a tired rattle, belt-driven systems groaning like bones in old weather. I checked my portable array, battery full, sensors primed, environmental models loaded. A ritual more than necessity. I'd made runs into the lower levels before, but this was different. Not past sub-level 16. Never this deep. Not into Starcradle's vault. Not into the graveyard. The case I carried bumped lightly against my knee, its reinforced sides humming with internal containment seals. I tightened my grip. The creak of my knuckles was a small, human sound, a good reminder. Because every other sound down here belonged to something else. The walls, the infrastructure, 60 years of buried secrets groaning under their own history. Sector 20. Officially long-term anomalous storage and containment. Unofficially the junkyard for things too dangerous to destroy and too disturbing to study. They were buried under deniability, behind layers of reinforced concrete left to rot like forgotten gods. Starcradle was one of the oldest, a name spoken like an artifact, not a device, not a project, a tombstone for something that was never alive. Until now. The elevator came to a halt with a lurch that rattled my teeth. The mesh doors fought open, scraping rusted metal against older metal. Beyond lay a corridor with sagging beige wall panels, the seams webbed with oxidized grime. Pressure had bent everything subtly out of shape. The angles were wrong, just slightly, but wrong in a way that was more unsettling than obvious damage. A maintenance drone lay collapsed nearby, skeletal arms curled around a long-dead extinguisher. Its optics were dead, its frame folded like a kneeling figure in some lost rite. I stepped out. The floor resisted slightly, something sticky beneath my boots. A leak, maybe, half-dried. It smelled like ozone and pennies. Breach residue, probably. Not dangerous? Not yet. Area 51 was myth to the world above. Flying saucers, autopsy rooms, desert conspiracies. But here, past the stories, past the burned files and staged denials, it was uglier, functional, loveless, deep. The corridor narrowed. My shoulders could brush both walls if I stretched. I didn't. It wasn't superstition. It was probability. Touch meant contact. Contact meant exposure. And in Sector 20, every variable was armed. I passed a door marked Infrastructure Core, authorized personnel only. Someone had jammed a charm into a crack in the warped frame, a cheap plastic rabbit's foot, sun-bleached into a gray nub. Left here like a talisman, maybe. Or a joke. I didn't touch it. My orders were precise. Sub-level 19, Chamber 47A. Direct access via maintenance conduit, HJ8. No detours. But precision doesn't matter when the walls start shifting. I counted paces. 97 steps in, I heard boots. Slow, deliberate. A figure appeared around the bend. Stocky, jumpsuit streaked with black grease. Tool belt hanging low like a gunslinger's. Victor Rudd, maintenance supervisor. Keeper of failing systems and last-ditch fixes. He didn't slow when he saw me. "You the math guy?" he rasped. His voice sounded like old sandpaper. "Doctor, Ashokul Venataram," I said. Formality meant nothing here. My degrees didn't matter. Only the tools I brought. He offered his hand, big, calloused, a fading skull tattoo peeking from his sleeve. I shook it. Up close, his skin trembled. Not from fear, but from the hum of the place. Everything here hummed, slowly, deeply. Vic sized me up. Don't look like the kind that gets dirty. I was told contamination was low. He snorted. Ain't that kind of dirt. He turned and walked. I followed. We moved in silence through junctions marked by peeling hazard tape and service ducts that whispered to themselves. The walls had begun to curve slightly, unnatural bulges warping the flatness into something uncomfortable. Not design, pressure, weight. You know why you're really here? Vic asked. I didn't answer right away. There was no point. He'd seen too many clean suits show up with questions and leave in silence. Starcradle, I said eventually. Vic gave a slow nod. Been dormant longer than I've been alive. But now, he tapped the wall. The floor's sweating. We turned down a service conduit. Ribbed steel walls, flickering red strips along the ceiling. A failed drone loader slumped ahead, its legs twisted like broken insect limbs. Vic knocked lightly against a corroded pipe. Feel that? Under my boots, the floor throbbed. Not vibration, not mechanical hum. Something slower, like the pulse of a sleeping animal. Still think numbers will save you? Vic asked. They haven't failed me yet, I said. But it wasn't bravado. It was faith. The only kind I had left. We reached hatch 47A, reinforced, thick, old. Vic twisted the locks with effort, steel grinding against itself. He paused, his hand on the wall, sensing something beyond measurements. You going in alone? Protocol. He didn't like it. If you see it move indifferent, don't try to map it. That's why I'm here, I said. To map it. Vic muttered something that might have been a prayer. That's the problem. The hatch opened. Air slipped out, dry, sterile, stale. It wasn't just old, it was preserved. The breath of something that had been holding itself still. Inside, the chamber was hexagonal. Lead-reinforced concrete walls traced with old fault lines. In the center, floating inches above a scorched plinth, was Starcradle. At first, it looked like glass, then flesh, then crystal. The light played tricks. Colors slid across it like oil, revealing symbols that flickered at the edges of recognition. It had no heat, no weight, just presence, and something deeper, vibration in the air, slow and deliberate. I unpacked the array, steady hands, focused. Scan ran clean, 15 seconds of confirmation. Dormant, stable. Then it shifted. The patterns inside Starcradle began folding, recursing, mimicking organic growth, but more. Not just cells, not just DNA, design, intent. It was forming something, a nested pattern growing in complexity, echoing embryonic development. But warped, not human. I recalibrated. It wasn't error, it was evolution. And in the center of the pattern, a prime modulation, a message, a mind. It was answering me. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. A man stood in the doorway, black suit, pale eyes, rosary tucked into his jacket. Calm like silence before a storm. Dr. Venataram, he said, you stand at the cradle of something far older than your models can predict. He stepped past the alarms. I'm Father Jerome Cross, he said. I'm not here to study your numbers. I waited. The chamber pulsed around us. I was sent to watch them fail. I didn't sleep the night after I met Starcradle. I didn't even try. Sleep felt like an invitation, an opening in the mind. And something in that chamber wanted openings. The scans didn't just deviate, they rewrote. The internal patterns weren't fixed, they shifted on observation, adapting, refining. Starcradle was growing, not like a machine, but like a thought that had learned how to sculpt itself from infrastructure. It wasn't just transmitting signals, It was building itself with the systems around it, with the facility, with us. I ran simulation after simulation, trying to isolate the deformation vectors, the prime sequence, the rate of recursive pattern shift. Nothing held. Normal systems decay. This evolved. The structure's baseline logic shifted so fast that the model failed on input, as if the math collapsed the moment it was noticed. That's when I knew the truth wasn't in the numbers anymore. It was inside them. The next morning, Father Cross found me. I was hunched over a terminal, pages of notes scattered around me, overlaying diagrams from bioinformatics, embryogenesis, and, God help me, symbols pulled from ancient apocryphal myth. Not because I believed, because nothing else fit. "You see it, don't you?" he asked, standing in the doorway. I didn't look up. "I see a structural system that's rewriting itself faster than I can track." He stepped into the room, placing a battered book beside my terminal. The pages crackled with age, diagrams from Babylonian, Mayan, Polynesian myths, spirals, birth from self symbols, gods vomiting worlds, universes folding into the bodies of their creators. It was myth, not data, but somehow the pattern was the same. "Starcradle is not a machine," he said. "It's an event." The idea stuck in my brain like a sliver of glass. An event, a recursion, not decay, birth. 3 shifts later, Sector 20 groaned awake like a dying lung. The emergency lights flickered and the klaxon stuttered a warning older than I was. The alert wasn't total lockdown, but it was close. Infrastructure compromise. Isolation protocols engaged. I was in Node 3, surrounded by the dying chatter of obsolete servers and flickering terminals that barely held their own data. Half the archive had already fallen silent. The other half spoke in static bursts, fragmented logs, corrupted histories. I was trying to trace Starcradle's activation signals backward, hoping to catch the moment it woke. Instead, I caught the rupture. The lights pulsed once, my hair lifted, then static cracked across the floor plates, and the air itself felt off, heavier. A heartbeat I couldn't hear but felt under my ribs. The ceiling groaned, metal twisted somewhere overhead. Then Vic's voice cracked through my calm. "Doc, you copy? Here. You need to get the hell out of Node 3, now." "What's happening?" "Containment seals are moving, structural loops, distortion fields, crawlways are folding in on themselves." He didn't have to explain. Distortion fields was code. It meant the geometry was failing. Walls were turning inside out, angles were changing mid-step. Space was folding around the thing in chamber 47A. I grabbed my pack and ran. The hall outside smelled wrong, not chemical, organic. A stink of copper and heat, like blood in static. I turned down a service corridor. One of the biometric scanners sparked as I passed, then displayed a string of numbers. Not a code, not an error. A sequence of prime numbers, exactly the same as the signal from Starcradle's initial anomaly. It wasn't random. It was a signature, a greeting. Vic was waiting at Junction 5B. His face was tight, gray around the mouth. Next to him lay the sheared remains of a maintenance drone, sliced clean, molecular precision, like a surgical cut performed by someone with no fingers and perfect knowledge of fault lines. "Cross is down in Sector C," Vic said. "Signals dead, static on all bands. We've got to pull him out." He handed me a beacon, an analog fallback model, heavy as hell and older than the Cold War, built for magnetic storms and black sites. "If the corridors loop, that'll get you out, unless they shift the laws on you completely." We moved fast. Sector C had always been unstable. Biological containment, early hybrid prototypes, black biotech, stuff they tried to build without fully understanding the rules. Now it was all changing. The walls were sprouting. Not plants, not cracks, patterns. Raised whorls that mirrored the cellular spiral of division. Concrete curving subtly, mimicking muscle fiber or folded tissue. The floor buckled beneath our boots in slow, pulsing knots. We found 2 corpses, curled fetal, no trauma, just still. Their faces slack, eyes glazed with a film that shimmered under our lights. No violence, no pain, just turned off. I forced myself to move past, analyze later. Cross was priority. He was pinned between 2 failed bulkheads near the central substation, still alive, pale, shaking, but alive. "I knew you'd come," he said. Not surprised, not grateful, certain. Vic pried the door open with a shoulder and a steel crowbar. We pulled Cross free. The air here was thick, not with heat but resistance, like breathing syrup. I turned to scan the way back, and saw it. The corridor had shifted behind us. Not collapsed, not blocked, redefined. We were still standing, we were still moving, but we were no longer where we'd been. "Out of time," I said. I could barely get the words out. Vic didn't argue. He slapped a patch against the emergency override. The substation door opened just enough to let Cross squeeze through. We turned back the way we'd come. Vic paused. "You hear that?" I listened, a wet sliding sound beneath us, like muscle dragged across glass. Something moved under the floor. Not pipes, not cables, something alive. The floor opened beneath him. It didn't collapse, it peeled, like paper, like something finished with the old shape. For 1 second, Vic was there. Then the pattern took him. His arm caught in the curling edge. Fine strands like nerves or vines threaded up through his jumpsuit into his skin. He screamed, a raw, primal sound, and then he folded. That's the only word. Folded. Like a paper model collapsing in on itself. When it was done, there was no body, just a spiral burn etched into the wall. A fossil. A memory. Cross pulled me back. We ran, past doors that no longer led to rooms, past walls that breathed and dreamed and learned, past shapes that might have once been alive, or might be the dreams of something that never was. We barricaded ourselves in a maintenance alcove. Manual locks still worked, steel and sweat and gravity still held. Barely. Vic was gone. "I saw it take him," I choked. "What was that?" Cross was pale, gripping his rosary like it could anchor him. "It doesn't kill," he said. "It repurposes." That night, I tried to run simulations again. I fed in everything. Starcradle's readings, gravitational drift, field anomalies, Vic's corridor deformation vectors. The simulations ran and failed. Not because the data was wrong, because the rules were changing. The environment was recursive. It evolved, not outward like an explosion, inward, folding, nesting, spiraling. A mind, or something like a mind, extending itself into space using our infrastructure as skeleton, womb, and ink. It wasn't leaking energy. It was leaking design. At 3:47 a.m., the lights blinked. Just once. The old CRT in the corner, dead for weeks, snapped on. Static. Then, something. A shape. A suggestion of one. Branches, limbs, veins, all tangled and shifting like a fetus inside a hurricane. It lasted less than a second. I cut the power. I sat in the dark for a long time, heartbeat hammering, watching the walls, waiting for them to remember I was there. It was growing, and it knew me now. We stopped calling them days. Without sky, without sun, time became an illusion, a habit you had to force like breathing. There were only shifts, waking and working, running and hiding, waiting and knowing. No beginning, no end. After Vic, silence lingered differently. It didn't echo. It pressed. Cross and I moved through the deep veins of Sector 20, like ghosts squatting in the ruins of a story that hadn't been written yet. The beacon still worked, thudding gently against my hip, an analog heartbeat to follow when logic failed. We moved slowly because rushing no longer mattered. Direction wasn't real anymore. We weren't navigating space, we were navigating intention. Starcradle didn't grow linearly. It nested, layered itself like tissue over infrastructure, like thought around memory. It fed on meaning, not power. It didn't need to move fast, it just needed to continue. It was the slowest apocalypse imaginable, and it had already begun. We passed places that had been familiar, now barely recognizable. Hallways curled inward like embryonic folds, pipes rippled like veins. A surveillance camera blinked at us, then melted. No heat, no sound, just changed. The floor began to soften in places, as if rejecting the idea of being walked on. "Do you still believe you can model this?" Cross asked once, his voice thin, already echoing before it left his mouth. "No," I said, "not anymore." He didn't nod, he just kept walking. He already knew. The access tunnels we used weren't on any map. Cut during expansion years by vanished contractors, sealed by bureaucracy. They weren't meant to last. Ironically, they were the safest now, old enough, stupid enough, to be ignored. Starcradle wasn't interested in forgotten things. It wanted attention, but it would notice us soon. We came out near the geothermal shafts, supposed to vent excess heat from containment cores. Now they radiated cold, not temperature, something else. Absence, pressure in reverse, a slow siphon that pulled at your thoughts. I looked down one shaft and saw it knitting itself through the stone, filaments spreading like root systems under flesh. A child was being born in the dark. Not a creature, not a weapon, a principle. It mirrored us. It used our biology, our physics, our language of design. But wrong. Or right in a way we couldn't survive. It wasn't malicious. It didn't need to be. Fire doesn't hate wood. At sub-level 21, the containment chamber had changed completely. It was no longer a vault. It was a cathedral. Concrete had warped into arches. Rebar twisted into ribbed vaults. Lead shielding dripped like candle wax. Light from our headlamps refracted unnaturally, splintered into shadows that moved independently of their sources. The floor pulsed beneath us, not with heat, with rhythm, and at the center, Starcradle. It no longer floated, it no longer shimmered. It had opened, extrusions unfurled from its surface like embryonic limbs, some glassy, some soft, some threaded with twitching veins. Inside, the thing was growing, organs approximated but alien, logic paths in tissue, vascular recursion models sculpted from memory and instinct. I saw lungs that didn't breathe, a spine that pulsed with color, nodules forming like thoughts before words. It wasn't copying life, it was interpreting it. Not alien, not human, something older than either. A recursion engine, a creation spiral, the first draft of a new biology that remembered being data. It saw us, no eyes, no face, but I felt the weight of its gaze, not a look, a pressure, a tide against my skull, not hostile, just curious. Cross caught me before I staggered. "It's reaching," he said, "but it doesn't know what it's reaching for." I stared at it, heart thudding so hard it hurt. I wanted to run. I wanted to kneel. I wanted to understand. But most of all, I wanted to forget. Because in that moment, I realized something I had denied all along. We hadn't found Starcradle. We hadn't built it. We hadn't activated it. We had been grown toward it. This facility, these protocols, every buried project, every abandoned experiment, all of it, root systems toward a seed we never saw. We were not its creators. We were its environment. It was not a mistake. It was an inevitability. I turned to Cross, voice hollow. "What happens when it finishes?" He looked at me with eyes too tired for fear. If we're lucky, he said, it forgets we were here. We didn't run. There was nowhere left to run. We fell back into the maintenance levels, buried behind decades-old bulkheads, insulated from the new geometry like fossils in bone. The beacon still thudded. I still held it, but it felt like a comfort a child clutches long after understanding it's useless. We found a rusted control room, manual locks, no electronics, just rust and memory. On the wall, spray-painted in red, "Stay below the hum." We obeyed. I collapsed, legs numb, mind burning. Cross stood at the door, hands on the frame, eyes closed, feeling for the hum, trying to measure how long we had left before even this place was noticed. "How long before they know?" I asked. He didn't look at me. When containment fails completely, when surface telemetry shows structural collapse, maybe not even then. He smiled bitterly. "They've buried worse, Doctor. Simpler to lock the doors, simpler to forget. Let it become another myth wrapped in sand, a story told by men who can't sleep at night." I thought about the lifts, about the emergency lines. I could go back, but I knew I wouldn't make it. Because Starcradle didn't need to escape to spread. It needed only one mine to break open. Mine had cracked the moment I traced the spiral too far. Cross turned to me, eyes hard now. "You must survive," he said, "but not to escape, to remember." He pulled a battered field recorder from his jacket. Analog, untraceable. "Record what you've seen. Encode it. Bury it in math. Let it be a warning, not a signal." He placed it in my hand. Then he stepped through the bulkhead door, sealing it behind him. A final turn of the lock. I screamed his name, but he was already gone, walking into the spiral. Understanding is the most contagious thing in the universe. And now I understood. Time stretched in the dark. My watch ticked forward, then back. The beacon thudded off rhythm. My vision blurred into fractals. And still, I waited. Eventually, they found me. A retrieval team. Faces blank behind radiation visors. No questions, just orders. They pulled me up through corridors that had forgotten what shape meant. Through lifts that still obeyed gravity. Barely. Past checkpoints where cameras spun without signal. Back to the surface. To silence. I was debriefed. Signed papers I couldn't read, assigned to a different wing, a different project, a different name. They told me it was over, but I know better. I sleep in a room lit by artificial day. I work on system simulations for people who smile too quickly, but I know. Starcradle isn't gone. It never leaves. At night, I feel it at the edge of thought, a spiral tightening, a prime number whisper. The curve of a question that answers itself, and I know it's waiting for me to calculate one thing too perfectly, because once you understand, you become. And deep beneath Groom Lake, in the sealed rot of Sector 20, Starcradle breathes. It does not rage, it does not hunt, it simply grows, and so do I.